All right, the prosecution just wrapped up their rebuttal statement in the state of Iowa versus Zachary Keene. Again, he's on trial for the murder of his 4-month-old son, Sterling. We want to switch gears while that's going on in that courtroom and talk about the 2005 case of Paul Cortez. Back in 2005, a young, inspiring Broadway dancer, Catherine Woods, was killed just 3 days after Thanksgiving. You can see her there on your screen. There were two suspects in this case, Paul Cortez and David Hahn. Both had an on-again, off-again relationship with Catherine. You can see Paul Cortez there on your screen. But only one of those men was convicted. That was Paul Cortez. Now, many people have said that Paul Cortez was falsely accused and wrongfully convicted, and that the real killer actually got away. One of those people is Paul's current attorney, Toni Angeli, joining me right now. Toni, thanks so much for coming in.
And thank you for having me here.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure. So tell me the background of this case. Paul Cortez, 2005, convicted of killing Catherine Woods. Can you give our viewers a little background of what happened there on that night?
Well, in 2005, when this homicide occurred, Paul Cortez and Catherine had been dating for a long time, for a year, and she was in an estranged relationship with David Hahn, the actual perpetrator, but he had been asked to leave the apartment, allowed to come back in the apartment, and that strained situation was the pressure that led to him murdering Catherine Woods.
So you believe David Hahn is the actual perpetrator, but Paul was convicted. What was the basis of that conviction? I understand there was speculation of a bloody fingerprint inside that apartment. Talk to me about that bloody fingerprint.
I will. From the inception of the case, law enforcement had identified David Hahn as the true perpetrator, but in examining the crime scene, they found a fingerprint, a latent fingerprint on the wall underneath some blood smear that matched Paul Cortez. So because of that fingerprint, which wasn't addressed properly at trial, the forensic of it was not examined, an expert did not testify to the jury to explain it. It appeared that, and the prosecutor argued that, wrongly, that that fingerprint was left in blood at the time of the homicide.
So there was no expert that actually testified to the fingerprint. You're saying it was an overlay of a fingerprint that was previously left there, correct?
Right, and I'm not just saying that. Numerous experts have said that, and that information has been submitted to the court. But it was not addressed by trial counsel and was not presented to the jury. So what the jury heard was, there's a fingerprint, it's in blood, he committed the crime, which is not what happened.
Got it. So what other evidence did they have on Paul besides this fingerprint inside the apartment?
In actuality, that fingerprint is the only piece of direct evidence. It's the sole piece of evidence, as the prosecutor conceded, that shows that Paul Cortez committed that crime. There were, however, some cell phone records that became part and parcel of the trial. Also, those weren't addressed by a forensic cell phone expert, unfortunately.
Okay, so before we talk about the cell phone records, let's talk about the timeline on that day, because this becomes crucial, of course, for your client. Now, I know Paul said he was one place. David actually said he was in another place. What time did the actual homicide occur? Do you know?
The homicide, we actually do know the time that the homicide occurred with specificity, because there were 4 ear witnesses that heard the homicide occurring. Those witnesses were one in an apartment adjacent to Catherine Woods' apartment, the decedent, and another living on top of her. So we know that the altercation, which was prolonged, and she suffered and fought, struggled for her life, started at about 6 and ended by, at the latest, 6:25.
So what is that based on? I know you said there were ear witnesses, but what are they basing their timing on?
The timing is based upon their cell phone records. One of the witnesses was on the phone in a phone call with another ear witness who actually could hear the screams from another apartment through the phone. So we have the cell phone records of when that call began and when that call ended. So we know the homicide happened within that time frame. And the person who was on the phone looked at his cable TV box and knew that it was 6:25.
Got it. So what you're saying is there's no way Paul was anywhere around the apartment here in New York City at the time of the murder, correct?
It's impossible for Paul Cortez to have been in that apartment for numerous reasons, but the most significant reason is David Hahn was in that apartment, and we know that.
And you know that based on?
We know that because there's surveillance video footage, which again the jury did not see, that shows David Hahn exiting the apartment at 6:37:52.
Got it. And we have that surveillance footage up on the screen now. That's actually David and Catherine that we're seeing there coming in. But you
And
can
that's
see,
David Hahn leaving right now.
So the person on the left you're seeing is David Hahn.
I'm saying it. The prosecution's conceded it. And in fact, law enforcement's notes also indicate it. David Hahn left the apartment at 6:37:52, almost 13 minutes after the homicide had occurred.
So 13 minutes. We know that the homicide occurred over several minutes. You heard screams, witnesses heard screams.
Yes.
Was there any talk of the crime scene possibly being cleaned up or something like that?
That's also very important. There wasn't any talk about it at the trial, but there is evidence that, yes, there was cleanup that happened in that apartment. Again, not heard by the jury, but there was an agent that was used to identify blood smears in different areas of the apartment, and there was cleanup in the tub and in the bathroom.
So this definitely doesn't sound like someone that rushed into an apartment to do this spur of the moment, heat of passion murder and then rush out of the apartment. What you're saying is this was someone that was in the apartment for several minutes, who did this, who attempted to clean this up.
And by all accounts would have been covered in blood.
Right. So who was it that actually called 911?
David Hahn actually calls 911 later that evening, about 20 minutes later, and identifies that Catherine Wood is dead. And at that point, another interesting fact, he has changed his clothing.
He's changed his clothing.
He's changed his clothing.
From the original video of him and Catherine walking into the apartment.
Yes, yes.
That's very interesting. So I understand that Paul may have been seen on some surveillance footage at Duane Reade or something like that, several blocks away?
Many blocks away, 20 blocks away. He was, now, the defense has not received this video, not at trial. They didn't request it. It wasn't provided to them. I have requested, I haven't seen it yet, but it's in law enforcement's notes that Paul Cortez, as he said, was at a Duane Reade at 106th Street. And we would love to see those images because I am quite certain that if he was covered in blood, law enforcement would have played that for the jury. But
Yeah, you would assume. And real quick in 30 seconds, is there any doubt in your mind that Paul Cortez is an innocent man?
Not at all. He spent a third of his life in prison, and he needs to be freed.
And this was 13 years ago, correct?
13 years.
Toni, I thank you so much for coming in, sharing that story with us. We appreciate it. And we are going to toss to a quick break. We have so much more to come in the Wilburn case as well as the Keene case. They're both on jury watch right now. We're going to cover that as soon as we have those decisions by those juries. We'll be right back to the Law and Crime Network. Stay tuned. Don't go away.